Avatar: The Last Airbender is a cartoon that does a fantastic job of building up the world that its characters live in. From the concept of the Avatar being reborn eternally to protect humanity, to the idea of the four bending styles and those who use them splitting into four nations based on element, and the 100-Year War being born on the conflict between Avatar Roku and Fire Lord Sozin. There is one bit of lore, however, that seems to be a bit abandoned. This piece is the interaction between the four elements themselves. While the show goes all Thanos on us and tries to insist that the elements are perfectly balanced as all things should be, I feel like the definition of balance is being misunderstood. In a food chain, while the ecosystem remains stable, it's not equal. The predators are still killing their prey and destroying lower life forms, but it is necessary to keep the world in order. Balance does not directly translate to equality, but rather to stability in this instance. In the same way, I feel that the four elements are less balanced than they may seem at first glance. I'm not referring to the four nations here, rather the specific elements and bending styles. Some are better than others in terms of combat and practical use. Today, I'm going to be bringing you the first episode in a new series on my channel that takes an in-depth look at each element and evaluates their usefulness, both in combat and out. Before we start, we need to set a baseline for how these elements are going to be evaluated. As shown in the Legend of Korra, bending isn't just used for combat, but also used in practical life. So for this evaluation, both need to be accounted for. The way I'll be going about it is by scoring each element out of 10 in 3 categories. These categories are offensive combat, defensive combat, and practical application. This way, all aspects of an element's bending style are accounted for equally. The total score will be out of 30, and the element with the highest score is the winner. Additional powers granted by each element will be addressed as necessary to their category. Now let's move on to the actual evaluations of each element. Today's episode will be focused on water.
Water.
Water is an interesting element to start with, as its power seriously varies from location to location. Let's start with its offensive capabilities. Water can be lashed out and used as a whip by the bender, or be used in high volume to push opponents back or incapacitate them. Waterbenders also have the ability to change the state of matter of water at will. This is used to its greatest effect by waterbenders inhabiting the poles of the planet, as waterbenders in both tribes could bend the large volumes of ice around them and use it to throw at opponents, or make the ice extremely sharp and function as a sword, or any other blade-type weapon. A limitation of this is shown when Katara makes small circular ice razors to fire at Paku, and he destroys them effortlessly. While the blades were very sharp, the move exposes the low durability of water in this form, which is why it's not great to use in an offensive manner like this. It can also be used to trap opponents by restraining them with the water whips used as weapons previously, although that's really more of a defensive maneuver. The only other major offensive use of waterbending I can think of is bloodbending. Bloodbending is one of the best combat strategies for a waterbender, although in waterbender circles, it's typically viewed as a bit of a taboo. With bloodbending, you can control another being's actions and make them function as a lackey who can be controlled remotely to a certain extent. Using bloodbending to control someone else also makes it so that the waterbender is less likely to get injured in the process, so it gets bonus points for that. Outside of this though, there isn't much else to water's offensive capability. It tends to be very predictable on the offensive side and gains a lot more from its superb defensive uses, especially if the waterbender doesn't have a massive source of water readily available. Since water's usage tends to be pretty repetitive, with little ability to mix up attacks and keep opponents on their toes, and the fact that its best offensive move is not very widespread and viewed as a taboo, I'm going to give water an offensive combat score of 5.5 out of 10. Let's now move on to water's defensive capabilities. Because water has more substance than its opposite element, fire, it's a much more effective defensive element. To start with some basics, a waterbender could create a shield of water to absorb an attack, or slow the momentum of an object to lessen its force. The shield could also be frozen to create a shield that would be much better at fully blocking attacks. Water in its liquid state could be used as a wall, although if the size of an object intended to be stopped by water is so large that it would require a full wall, ice might be the better bet there. Another fantastic capability of water and ice based on the phase change is being able to trap your enemy in ice. If a small amount of water is available, only the feet may be able to be frozen, rendering the opponent immobile. However, if the waterbender has a large source of water, they can surround their opponent's full body in ice and leave them completely motionless. The benefit this has is that it leaves a bender powerless, as they can't move their arms to bend either. Katara uses this move on Azula in the final Agni Kai. Azula is unable to use her bending, which leaves Katara free to tie Azula's hands so she can melt the ice. Azula is quite possibly the most dangerous firebender in the show, and this freezing move took Azula down no sweat. Of course, in this instance, Katara did prey upon the aggressiveness of the firebender, which will be discussed in more depth in a later episode. But the move could still work in another setting. A waterbender could also surround themselves in full-body water armor. This is used many times by Katara, but an extreme version of this is seen when Avatar State Aang works in tandem with the Ocean Spirit to form a kaiju-esque water demon of firebender destruction. Like a basic water shield, it provides good protection and absorption. Waterbenders can also use steam, or clouds in tandem with an airbender, as camouflage. While this isn't directly a defensive move, it is used to prevent attacks from landing, which is defensive. Another interesting thing to note about the fight between Katara and Master Paku is that very few direct attacks were thrown out. Most of the waterbending used in the fight was either blocking a charging opponent or trapping them in place, which also lends itself to water's defensive style. The last prevalent defensive water usage that isn't a basic block thing with water or ice move is one that we only really see used by a waterbender as a last-ditch desperation move. This move is bloodbending. When Hama is about to make Aang and Sokka impale each other with her bloodbending, Katara bends Hama's blood in desperation in order to save them. If an attacker is severely pressuring a waterbender, the waterbender can bloodbend the attacker and prevent them from dishing out any more damage by puppeteering them. This isn't a very conventional use of the art, but it does work. Water gets a lot more use out of its powers for defensive means, and for these reasons, I'm going to give water a defensive combat score of 8.5 out of 10. Water's practical applications are not super diverse, but the ones it does have are extremely useful. Hama shows Katara that waterbenders have the ability to pull water out of anywhere, using the moisture in the air to create water. This skill would be extremely useful in a situation when water was needed, such as in a desert. While yes, desert air is also quite dry, a waterbender would be able to use what limited moisture was in the parched desert's air to stay alive. Water is a necessary element for human survival, and without it, you will die. Therefore, a waterbender having the ability to pull water out of anywhere should not be underestimated. In tandem with other benders, waterbenders can perform other tricks with water that could be useful in other scenarios. With the help of an earthbender, a waterbender can filter dirt and gunk out of water to make it pure and clean again. Katara does this with the help of Aang and Toph in the Book 3 episode, The Painted Lady. Earlier in Book 3, in the episode The Headband, Katara and Aang work together to create a giant cloud to camouflage Appa when they infiltrate the Fire Nation. While this form of camouflage could have been put into defensive maneuvers, in the instance that it was used, no combat was actually taking place at the time, so I'm going to put it here. Another major practical use of water seen quite a lot throughout the series is water healing. While it may seem like something that is exclusively useful to combat, and it is quite useful in combat, people do also get hurt in their everyday life. This skill would be extremely helpful to have in your everyday life, as healing any reasonably minor injury with water power is shown to be an extremely valuable skill. Hell, with superpowered spirit water, Katara is able to bring Aang back to life after he died. That's how OP this skill can be if it's used properly. This is where most of water's practical usefulness comes from to me. This one skill is so good that it almost single-handedly validates water as an out-of-combat element. Another skill I do want to touch on is seen more at the North Pole, but also at the South Pole before the Waterbender Purge. This skill is ice engineering and construction. Waterbenders can use ice to construct buildings and even use their bending to power mechanisms. This is seen at its maximum power at the North Pole, where the tribe has used the power of bending to construct magnificent palaces, and can set up ice fortifications and walls at the drop of a hat. They can also bend the ice to let people in and out, as shown when Team Avatar arrives for the first time. This skill of being able to construct things by bending ice is useful, don't get me wrong, but other than the North Pole and South Pole, where is this skill really going to be that useful? The skill is put to enough use at the polls to warrant inclusion, but this usefulness shouldn't be blown out of proportion. While water healing is insanely useful, the other abilities are either very niche or have very limited usefulness. They all do have their uses though, which means that water is a solid element to have at your disposal in your day-to-day life. All of these aspects combined lead me to give water a practical application score of 7 out of 10. After adding up the totals, water scored 21 out of 30. That's not a terrible score, but we'll have to see how the other elements stack up to truly get a sense of how good it is in comparison. Water was also very hard to evaluate. First, because it was the first element I'm evaluating, so I had no idea how to scale it in a vacuum because I had no other scores to go off of. And second, because like I said earlier, water's power is in constant flux based on where you are. I hope the scaling seems fair to you, and if not, let me know what I can change for part 2, where I'll be going over Earth. Until then though, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did and want to see more content from me, a like and subscription would be much appreciated. You know, unlike Disney Plus and Netflix, this subscription is free, so extra incentive for you to do so. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.